Welcome to the Daily Dawg podcast. Today is Sunday, September 21st, and this is the 2025 season. This is week 4, or the off week, or 2504, as we call it. And again, this is the off week, and this is the last podcast of the off week. Next week will be 2505. Week 5, it'll be Alabama week, and we'll be breaking down and digging deep into our upcoming game with Alabama. But we have a few things to wrap up and take a look at just as we wrap up our off-week coverage. And I apologize yet again, we did not get a Saturday morning podcast out, so this is being recorded on Saturday night and be available for people to listen to starting Sunday morning. So what we're going to do then is just take a quick roundup look around the SEC. Since Georgia didn't play, we do have some results out there. Not just the SEC, we'll look around the nation real quick and we'll take an idea, we'll get some ideas about how some of the games that played out this weekend while we were sitting at home and not playing. Well, I don't know what the guys were actually doing. I don't know what they get to do on a Saturday. I don't know if they're turned loose and they go home. I guess Gunnar Stockton was in Tiger, Georgia last night. They had a celebration at a home game there, retiring his jersey from his high school. Rabun County High School, I think, up in Tiger, Georgia. And I think I saw a quote that said he was grateful. So Gunnar is a man of few words and a fairly modest fellow. But we appreciate how he represents the University of Georgia and how he represents himself. So one of the things I've been talking about is I have a list, and I keep threatening to publish this on thedailydawg.com, and I promise I will soon, and I'll update it again for this coming week so that we can look at it. But I haven't yet completely published it. I've made a graphic, or I've been trying to get a graphic together and get everything going. And also, let me just say a word. We should have the video podcast up and running this week. That continues to be one of my things I'm working on, trying to get it together so you can watch me sit here and talk. But it will, part of me thinks it's kind of funny. I think you're probably happier just listening to me without actually watching me. But I have been saying all along that I view this as really not supposed to be so much of a show where I'm presenting to you as much as it's sort of like a conversation among good friends and Bulldog fans. And that's how I hope you get to think of it. So maybe it'll feel a little more friendly if you can actually watch me face to face talking to you on the video podcast. I have gotten the YouTube connection going now. So in addition to Apple and Spotify, you can find the Daily Dawg podcast in their audio form. All of the existing 19 episodes have been uploaded and they're on YouTube. And so now you can watch on YouTube as well, or listen or watch on YouTube. You can watch, but all it'll do is show you the cute little Daily Dawg football graphic, which I am very proud of, and I think it's very cute and charming, but it doesn't do much. It just sits there. So, so throughout the season so far, we've been talking about the games that matter, and there's 134 teams in FBS. All of them are not going to make the playoffs. Ultimately, we're going to have 12 teams that make the playoff. When we get down to the SEC championship, it'll just be 2 teams that play in the SEC championship, and we hope we know what one of those 2 teams will be, right? The Georgia Bulldogs. So we're kind of looking as each week goes by and trying to say, well, what are the other teams that might be a contender for Georgia to play in the SEC championship? And then what are the other teams that are in the national championship? Now that's going to be interesting anytime. It's always going to be something that everybody around the country is going to want to do. And all the national sports writers, ESPN, everybody makes their projections and constantly updates who they think is in the race for the playoff, who they think is a contender for the national championship. So this is not unique, but as a Georgia fan, or as Georgia fans, since this is a Georgia fan specific way of looking at college football, what we're doing, and we've been doing all season, is looking at those other contenders, both for the SEC and nationally, and comparing them to our team, because part of what we have to do is look at each new season as a unique season. The formula for winning a national championship is not the same this year as it was last year or the year before. The main point is you have to play the teams that are in front of you, and you have to beat them, especially when you get to the playoff. You could have 4 playoff games. You could have a first round game on campus at home, and then you could progress through the playoffs. That's what Ohio State did last year. They were not one of the 4 teams with a bye like we were. They had to play a first round game against Tennessee. They won that game, and then they moved through until they won the national championship through 4 games. And it was a great 4-game stretch for them, and it was very impressive. So as we are trying to evaluate and be reasonable, I mean, we're always going to be a little unreasonable. We're Georgia fans. We expect our team to win every game. We want our team to win every game. We expect and think we can win the national championship. And here's a little dirty secret for you. You probably figured this out. I think we're a contender for that. I think we have a good chance. But the question is, are we an outside contender? Are we an inside contender? Are we a leading contender? Where are we? 2021, we, on a certain level, we didn't surprise anybody. People looked at that team and said, this is a great team, but can they get over the hump? Well, we did. We won the national championship. 2022, we came in, we were the odds-on favorite. We go undefeated for the whole season, storm through the SEC, storm through the short playoff, the 2-game playoff. Well, I say storm through, but you get the idea. We nipped our way through on the Ohio State game, obviously, requiring them to miss that field goal for us to go on. But then, obviously, once we got to the game out in SoFi Stadium in California, in Los Angeles, we absolutely destroyed TCU. So that was a 2-game playoff run that we had to do back then, right? So we could have a 3 or 4-game run, depending on whether we get a bye this year. And so the real question is not just objectively, can Georgia make the playoff? Can Georgia win a national championship? I think those answers are definitively already true. We already know that we have an incredibly talented team. The question is, do we have the talent at the right positions to do what's necessary to win? And we already know that we have the coaches and the intangibles and the sort of the program history to win a national championship. We've done it twice in the last 4 or 5 years. So what is the question? Well, the question is, how does this team compare to the other teams out there? Last year, Ohio State was a team that we talked about that was full of a lot of veterans and guys that could have gone pro, but they used a lot of NIL money. They kept those guys around. Ryan Day really pulled together the coaching, I guess, and really was aggressive throughout the playoffs. You look at the scores and the way they played, and he maybe broke some of his own tendencies to not be as aggressive. And I don't know that it was really about Ryan Day's coaching so much as the right team, the right time. And a lot of it comes down to matchups. You could have a great team, but come to an unfavorable matchup. And a little bit, that's what happened to us going back in the 2023 season. Alabama, which has been a little bit of a kryptonite for Georgia, and we're going to talk about that a lot this week coming up, but Alabama, though, was definitely a team that has the tools that not only could beat Georgia, not only because they're talented, but they particularly had some of the things that maybe made matchup problems for us and made us more vulnerable to what they do best. So that led to a close game. Whoever blinks or makes the most mistakes might be the team that wins. We talked about all that this week with Tennessee. Tennessee they didn't make a lot of mistakes in the game against Georgia this week or last week, but they made just enough. Really one big one, obviously, at the end. 5-yard false start penalty. They moved the field goal back, and then they missed the field goal. And so, that was enough to open the door and let Georgia through and win the game in a game that was pretty nip and tuck back and forth. So anyway, that's just summarizing where we are. So we're trying to look at and say, okay, let's look at these other teams that are contenders. Let's look at teams that are going to be significant teams on the schedule, matchup problems or matchup concerns for the teams that are on their schedules, on these other contender schedules. So in other words, not every team that ends up being discussed here is a contender, but they are a team that plays contenders and could be a problem. And an example of that is when we get to the last week of the season, I right now have Washington on my grid. I don't think Washington is anywhere right now in the discussion as a contender, but they play Oregon, and that's been a game that can be tricky for Oregon. Especially seems like Dan Lanning seems to go crazy in the game against Washington and feel like he should go for 4th down from his own 6-yard line or something like that. And I'm not trying to rip on Dan Lanning. Dan Lanning's a great coach, right? And we are proud of the work he did when he was on the coaching staff for the Georgia Bulldogs. And I'm not saying we couldn't have won the national championship without him, but he was certainly a significant part. And Dan Lanning always should get a special place and a warm welcome from any Bulldog fan anywhere for what he did in his time as a Georgia Bulldog defensive coordinator. And we should be proud of his success at Oregon. He's showing that Kirby Smart, they call it the coaching tree, when you see coaches emerge from underneath a head coach and they start their own coaching run. And so Dan Lanning is a very successful aspect of the Kirby Smart coaching tree, and it just kind of adds to the legacy. These are the kind of things that continue to add sort of to the legacy and the overall impression of the Georgia program. You know, that you could take a coach that was one of your staff members and they could go on and be a national title contending coach themselves at another school. That's impressive, right? So kudos to Kirby Smart, kudos to Dan Lanning, and we'll be keeping an eye on Oregon because they are definitely one of those teams that is in that contention. But so again, my point being, just making an example, Washington right now is in a list of teams that show up on my radar, games that we'll take a look at, not because Washington has yet moved into contender status, but Washington is a game that has given Oregon trouble. They're not a top 25 team just yet. They haven't proved themselves in any way other than historically they're a problem for Oregon. So we're going to keep an eye on that. Now, eventually maybe Washington craters and we take that game off the schedule and say, look, we're not going to say that's a game we're still going to see it no matter what. We're going to look at or see all these games, right? But as far as the games that we're actually zeroing in on, putting our list and looking each week to say which are the games that are going to matter and help lead us not only to understand who's going to be in the playoff, but know what those teams are by the time they and we hopefully get there. And then for us, the key that we're getting towards is we're going to look at those matchups. And we're going to say, how do we match up against these teams? Because that's really going to end up being the key. Notre Dame proved to be a bad matchup for us last year. What was Notre Dame? They were not a very impressive offensive team. In fact, we outgained them in the game. They are defensively, I've mentioned this before, our team stifled Notre Dame in the playoff game last year. So why did Notre Dame win? Well, Notre Dame did all the little things, and they matched us mano-a-mano physically. They had a good offensive line. They had a great defensive front. They had been a great defensive team all year. And our team was a little bit hobbled offensively last year, like we've talked about. We saw that our team was not able to run the ball like we were used to. And so that changed how we did our play calling. So we had to throw the ball a lot. Our offense ended up being the most pass-oriented offense we've hardly ever seen at Georgia, going back to maybe the 90s or something when we had some weaker teams. And so we were imbalanced. We didn't control games the way we were used to doing it, especially because we were not controlling them with the run game. And we were not able to run for anything against Notre Dame. So in the games where we ran well, even if we didn't put up 200, 250 yards, but we ran with authority and we controlled parts of the game, like the two games against Texas, in both of those games, we won. So, but when we got to the Notre Dame game, Gunnar Stockton was able to play well, have nice overall total yardage, and not a lot of, like we worried about coming into the Tennessee game last week, not a lot of big downfield passes, not a lot of yard per, completion yard per average high kind of passes. But I think the coaches wanted that to be that way because they knew we didn't have a run game. They were trying to control the game a little bit more and not have the defense on the field all the time. So they used the passing game as an extension of a run game, and Gunnar was, game for that. But it's also worth noting that the offense had not been built around Gunnar. The offense had been built around Beck. And so it just didn't work the same. So running into a really great defensive front team, a team with a strong overall defense that could just continue taking the run away from us when we hadn't been super strong at it and force us to pass with a quarterback who had not had a lot of game experience in this kind of a big game was a smart game plan. And it drew us into what essentially, when you look at yardage and offensive effort, was basically a 50-50 game. But then Notre Dame was able to do the intangibles, and part of that was led by that defense. Again, that strong defense was a bad matchup against our offensive line, which underperformed last year. And so in the critical moment, they get a strip sack, fumble, they turn that immediately into a touchdown, and then they take the opening kick, they turn that into a touchdown, and now what was basically a 50-50 game statistically is way in favor of Notre Dame, and here we are facing an uphill climb against a defense that we can't really do anything against. So, bad matchup, right? Had we played other teams, I'm not saying we would have won the national championship if we just got the right matchups, and maybe it doesn't mean that much to advance further if you ultimately aren't going to be able to beat everybody and win the national championship. So if you might say, well, if you're just saying if we'd gotten a better matchup in the first playoff game, we would have gone further, is that valuable? Well, yes and no. I mean, you never know what matchups you might get. And so matchups definitely, I think, can make a big difference. So long story short, I'd rather have the right matchup, and that's what we're going to be looking at. So let's get back into this and talk about what happened this week, what was on the table this week, and what did we learn as Georgia fans, since we don't have a game of our own to break down. So the only two games that were on the slate this week that were on my list, my updated list coming into this week of 44 games, and that 44 included 7 that had already been played in week 1 and week 3, because there were no games on this list from week 2. Last week was a great week of college football. We talked about that. The first week was a great week of college football. The second week, including what we experienced, a long rain delay and a sort of boring game against Austin Peay, not a great week of college football. And it wasn't just us, it was the whole week. There wasn't even a single game. There was only one game, I think, between top 25 teams on the whole weekend, and none of the games that we are looking at here really were games that we thought are going to be significant in the way the national championship will play out. But this week there's a couple, and they're also only fringe games. These games are just barely on my list or radar. So Oklahoma-Auburn and Illinois-Indiana are the only 2 games on here. So why are these teams on here? Well, right now, Oklahoma is in my 15 teams that I think are on the watch list for the 12 playoff slots. Okay. They've had an impressive turnaround. They've got an exciting quarterback. They're doing, they were great defensively last year, even when they were a losing record team. And this year they suddenly have a dynamic offense. Again, that's how fast things can change in college football in the transfer and portal era. And they seem to have changed rapidly. They were a terrible offense last year, and now they're a dynamic offense. And so you match that with an already really good defense and a coach who is a defensive-minded coach, so you know the defense is going to be there, just like Kirby Smart is a defensive-minded coach. And Oklahoma's a team that's on the watch list. They're a team that's they came into today ranked number 11th in the AP poll, and so that puts them in most people's minds and in my mind in a position where we'd say, okay, this could easily be one of the 12 playoff teams. And from an SEC point of view, it certainly could be a team that we end up playing in the SEC championship should we make it there. Remember, the SEC championship now is not East and West. It's just the two teams with the best record and get through whatever all the tiebreakers are. Because with an 8-game schedule and a lot of teams that don't even play each other, or a lot of teams that did play each other, we're going to have some funky tiebreakers, especially if you see a bunch of teams that are, I say a bunch of teams, if 2 or 3 or 4 teams are 7-1 or 6-2, let's say there's one team that's 7-1 and a bunch of teams at 6-2, 5 or 6 teams, let's say there's 4 teams at 6-2. So now we're going to have to pick our SEC contestants out of, okay, the 1 7-1 team, they're in. But then you got 4 6-2 teams, and now you're going to have to go through a whole bunch of tiebreakers to figure out who the second opponent in that is. So there's a lot of teams in the mix for that right now. So Oklahoma is a contender. We're not yet ready, even though Auburn came into the week as a top 25 team, they're not on the contender list. They were ranked number 22nd in the AP poll, and just right now they have not been at an elite enough level or close enough to the playoffs the last couple of years, especially also struggling offensively, at least as far as holding on to the ball. They actually put up some yards and points last year, but pretty much fumbled the ball or threw an interception anytime it mattered, and walked themselves right out of games. So Auburn being a top 25 team and a team that could be on the rise, could be a team that could work its way into that playoff discussion, we certainly needed to look at the Auburn-Oklahoma games, circle that one and say, okay, this is a game then that could affect both the SEC and the national championship. So what happened in the game? Well, it was a close game back and forth. I think it was 17-all at the half. And I'm going to confess, I had to catch up on a lot of stuff. I hope you did what I did, which was take a chance. I know for all of us rabid dog fans, and maybe many of you, your significant other is a rabid dog fan as well. Maybe you guys both met and enjoyed going to Georgia football games. And I can tell you that my wife is a football fan, and I won't divulge all of let's just say she didn't go to Georgia, but she is an SEC football fan, and we'll maybe get into that another day, but not now. The point is that she's football friendly for sure, but I think anybody can maybe get tired of the amount of emphasis that the football season can get. I saw a funny video on one of the social medias today when I was checking my Daily Dawg type stuff, and it was this lady, and she's showing her husband going crazy over a football game, and then she's showing her exacerbated face, and the caption on the video was like, "This is me realizing that the only thing that that the entire emotional state of my husband's life is in the hands of 18-year-olds for the next 4 months." So I think a lot of people probably get tired of us rabid Bulldog fans. So hopefully your house is full of nothing but Bulldog fans, and then you guys can all just fully invest. But today was a great day if you're a Bulldog fan and you have other commitments in your life and family outside of just investing in football all day on a football Saturday, even as glorious as that is. So hopefully today was a good day to get outside and do something else. It was a pretty day, a little bit on the warm side, but not too bad, a good breeze, and a good time, especially with not a lot of great games on TV, to not have to sit and watch everybody else's games either. There just wasn't that much great to watch out there. But back to the Auburn-Oklahoma game. So I didn't see all the details, but it looks like basically it got to a point where Oklahoma was leading through a lot of the into the fourth quarter. They were up 22-17. I think Auburn got the ball last with a couple minutes on the clock and one last chance to do something there. In 22-17, you're down by 5. So look, it's within a score. A touchdown wins the game. A field goal wouldn't have helped them that much. But they were within, a touchdown drive of taking over and winning that game on the road against Oklahoma on the road. And Oklahoma apparently was actually able to sack Jackson Arnold, the former Oklahoma quarterback. So that's a funny deal, right? The quarterback at Oklahoma who people booed off the field last year for not performing, he's gone over to Auburn, and suddenly Auburn actually has a good quarterback. So what happened there? Well, Oklahoma went out and brought in from the portal this guy named John Mateer, who just sliced and diced his way through teams at Washington State last year. And now he's over in the SEC at Oklahoma, and Oklahoma is a whole different offensive team. So neither team put up a ton of offense. There's a lot of good defense, but enough offense and enough back and forth that the game was interesting. 22-17. Oklahoma gets the sack safety to make it a 24-17 game, and Auburn, basically ends up with having to kick the ball away with a minute to go in the game, and the game basically being over. So the other thing that's really terrifying is that Oklahoma had 10 sacks on the day. That is, I don't know much about the state of Auburn's offensive line. We'll have to read more about that later as we get closer to the Auburn game. But I don't know that I thought their offensive line was that bad, and I don't know if I thought Oklahoma's defensive line was that good. But that's a school record, I heard them say on the broadcast. I have no idea if that's an SEC record, but I wouldn't be surprised if it also is now an SEC record. 10 sacks in a game is freakishly a lot. And I think I saw another graphic that said that Oklahoma came into the game with just 7 sacks on the season. So now they have 17 in 4 games, which is extraordinary, especially when you had 10 in one game. And so the short answer is, if both of those teams were vying to get up off the deck, teams that were not impressive last year, were not even sniffing the top 25 or playoff contention towards the end of the year, both had started well and both were in the top 25, Oklahoma a little further up than Auburn. But, this was a game that the winner kind of jumps to the lead, right? So I think the answer is Oklahoma stays in the lead. They were 10th coming in. I haven't looked at the poll yet to figure out the implications of where they could or couldn't be depending on what else happened this week. But generally speaking, I think that they, if they're around 10, 11, 12, 8, 9, no, 8's probably too high. If they're somewhere between 9 and 12, that's probably about right for where they should be right now based on their resume and what they've done. And if they were close to that coming into this game, and I think they basically hold their position. Auburn lost narrowly on the road in an SEC contest to a historically great team and a team that looks like it's on the rise. I'm not sure that Auburn should fall out of the top 25 at 3-1 when you got Notre Dame that came in at 0-2 this week. But anyway, I think Auburn basically also kind of holds or maybe drops down a peg in their overall perception of their ranking here. But for our purposes, Auburn is definitely did not advance closer to that discussion about SEC contender or playoff contender, but Oklahoma looks legit. Whatever we thought about Oklahoma coming in, the position they're in, they look to hold that. So this was one of those games that mattered, and Oklahoma gets through it with the win. Another game that mattered that's not in the SEC was the Illinois-Indiana game. This is also one of the few games between ranked teams. I think Indiana was ranked 19th, and Illinois was stupidly ranked like 9th coming into this game, something like that. And Illinois basically just seemed to be getting grafted into a top 9 position. And I think basically what happened is Illinois went 10-3 last year, and to give them credit, they did beat. Did they beat Auburn? Who did they beat? They beat somebody. They beat an SEC team in the bowl game. And so they were 9-3 in the regular season. They beat an SEC team and finished at 10-3, and they finished something like 14th in the country. And I think they started this year also around 14th, and people said, well, Illinois. And then the way everything has gone, teams winning and losing, and they played 3 patsies, nobody important, they just sort of snuck their way up to number 9 in the AP poll this week coming in. But this is one of those rankings that I would say, is sort of silly. Like, I think they got filled into a slot, but they had not done anything last year or this year or any time in recent memory to make you think they would be worthy or legitimately the number 9 team in the country or anywhere near it. A top 25 team, sure. 10-3 last year, a top 25 team to be sure, maybe a top 15 team. But they didn't beat anybody important. Like a lot of teams, they lost mostly to the best teams on their schedule last year. They played Penn State. They lost to Penn State. They did beat Michigan, but Michigan was not a top 25 team. But, for them, that was a big deal. They probably don't have a lot of historical wins against Michigan. They lost to Penn State. They might have played Oregon and lost to them too. So Illinois was not, they were a team that beat up on weaker sister teams and got to 10 wins and was a top 25 team, deservedly so, but not anywhere near the number 9 team. Same thing coming into this season. I don't think they were better this season. If anything, they treaded water. They lost some parts. We know as Georgia fans, guy who scored 2 touchdowns, in the Tennessee game, didn't get a lot of yardage, but a couple really big, important runs. Josh McCray, this guy was playing for Illinois last year, and he's not playing for them now. He ran for, I think, like about 800 yards for Illinois last year and had 10 touchdowns, and now he's playing for Georgia. So it's hard to imagine they got better by losing him. I don't know much else about their roster. So anyway, Indiana, we also know the Indiana story. I don't think we have to go too deep into that. Everybody saw what Indiana was. They went 11-1 on a schedule that they only played one team that was legitimately good at any level, and that was Ohio State, and Ohio State beat them pretty thoroughly. And then they got into the playoff with that record, and they immediately got beat, and they didn't look even competitive at all in the playoff. So a nice record, and maybe because of the overall record, maybe they deserve to be a top 25 team as well, but not a team that anybody ever should have taken seriously as a contender. They got put into the playoff, and they showed they weren't that contender. So they started off ranked down a little further this year. They were in the bottom of the top 25, and they've been working their way up. They got into this game ranked number 19th. And one thing I can say is there was some press as a Georgia fan. We've talked about this once or twice. They have a kid named Mendoza at quarterback. He had been at Cal last year and put up nice numbers, and he's got more of the NFL prototypical body than, say, our current quarterback, Gunnar Stockton, maybe even more so than Carson Beck. Carson Beck has the height, and Carson Beck has a strong arm, but he's still a little on the thinner, weaker side. The NFL wants to see guys who, if they do get hit, can take the hit, and Mendoza looks more like a guy who Fernando Mendoza, I think is the name. Anyway, he's kind of got that body. He's got an NFL quarterback body. He's got a strong arm. And he apparently had a whale of a game today. And Indiana just absolutely destroyed Illinois. I think the final score is 66-10 or something. I'll go back and find that out. So what does that prove? I don't know. Nothing really. I mean, I already saw one headline pop up somewhere where, hey, college football, don't be mad. Illinois or Indiana's not going anywhere. They're for real. I don't know if they're for real. I mean, you beat a paper tiger badly, and you might be a paper tiger yourself. 2 paper tigers play each other. Is that something that we get real excited about? I don't. I don't believe in Illinois, as I just explained, and I really don't believe in Indiana for the reasons I just explained based on their schedule last year. So neither team has proved that they could play and consistently win any games against regular top 20, other teams that you would consider regular top 25 teams. So Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, they're playing in the Big Ten. They're not showing any propensity for winning those games. So I don't think it means a lot, but Indiana is going to be continue. This is sort of an elimination game, and we're going to keep an eye on both teams because this is another thing I alluded to on our last or second to last podcast, which one of the last two podcasts I alluded to a little bit of my crowing back at the Big Ten. The Big Ten, made a lot of noise in this last year, as we've been talking about. They want us to come to a 9-game schedule. They want us to join with them in this push to reformat the playoff with 16 teams and with 4 guaranteed slots for the SEC and the Big Ten. They know they have to get the SEC on board because the SEC is the only other conference that has the right to say this is what we're going to do and basically impose it. So they need to get an agreement between the SEC and the Big Ten about what the playoff will be to restructure the playoff to what they want it to be. And they want it to be that format. And they want it to be that format because their commissioner has this kooky idea of taking championship weekend, which is the weekend after the regular season when the SEC championship game, Big Ten championship, ACC, all these big conference championship games are played. They want to get rid of just having their one championship game, and they want to have 8 teams play in 4 games so that the winners of those teams are the automatic those games are the automatic qualifier for their conference's 4 guaranteed bids. Now, why do they want this? Because they really think that the 8th place team in the Big Ten is worthy of making the playoff and being a national title contender, and they want to make sure that slot is protected? No. They want to do this because if they could sell 4 championship games between 8 teams to the television partners, they get a lot more money for that than just one championship game on championship weekend. So this is a money grab, and that's all it is. But they have tried to wrap it up. Their commissioner and a lot of their coaches got on board at the talking season in July, when everybody was at media days, sort of digging at the SEC for only having an 8-game schedule while they impressively play this 9-game schedule. But the reality is their schedule, the Big Ten, despite all the teams in it, is incredibly top-heavy, as it always has been. You have Michigan and Ohio State. Sometimes you have one other team that gets up there, Penn State, Wisconsin, a couple people. And then look, we don't always have the same teams, and we rotate in. But just in the late 2000s, you look at what the SEC has done. Auburn won a national championship in 2010. Alabama's won several national championships. Georgia's won 2 national championships. LSU's won a couple national championships. So that's 4 different teams that have won national championships, in the SEC. No other conference is anywhere near that, in recent memory. Okay. So Ohio State and Michigan have won national championships in back-to-back years. And for Michigan, that was the first time in 20 or 25 years. For Ohio State, it had been about 10 years. Not trying to pick at them that much for that. We went a long time, and waited for just an SEC championship and national championship. So I know what that feels like. But my point is, those are their elite teams. Those are the banner standard bearers of the Big Ten, and it's not like they had been knocking over national championships a bunch over these last 20, 25 years. And those are the only 2 teams that have sniffed a national championship at all in the Big Ten in forever. So their schedule does not impress me, and we saw that with Indiana last year. Indiana didn't play a top 25 team other than Ohio State, who beat them pretty badly, and yet they win 11-1 and make the playoff and then get beat pretty badly in the playoff. So this is what you get. And Illinois, same thing. Illinois played a little bit better schedule last year, lost a couple more games, but still, was a top 25 team by just plugging their way through a very mediocre schedule. We're going to look at the SEC schedule and compare where everybody is. Especially, we're going to do that more and more as the season goes. This was week 4, so we're now a quarter of the way into our 12 guaranteed game schedule, right? Everybody's playing 12 games. So we're starting to have more and more to look at and see who we are, who Georgia is, and compare that to who these other teams are. So the best thing I can say about Indiana and Illinois is in some ways it didn't matter who won this game because I don't think either of them are really worthy of being a playoff consideration team. And in fact, I did have Illinois for the moment listed in the 15 teams. And I was just giving deference, I guess, to the fact that they were in the 15 teams that I was saying in contenders. And basically, I guess I just had them there because they were number 9 in the AP poll. So it's maybe I felt a little silly just leaving them out of the top 15 contenders for the playoff when they're number 9. And now that they've lost and lost badly, we can pluck them out of there. And maybe that's going to change my grid. So I will update the grid for this week and we'll talk about it. But right now we're sticking with the 44 teams that we came in, or the 44 games we came into this week. And one of the reasons Illinois is in consideration is they were one of the 15 teams in the grid that is a contender. A lot of the other teams that make the grid, like I mentioned, Washington, are only in there. Missouri is in there, USC's in there, Indiana's in there, Auburn is in there. These teams are only on the grid because they play teams that are in the 15. Okay, so Illinois played Indiana. Indiana wasn't in the grid, and Illinois has now taken a bad loss against Indiana. So maybe they'll end up swapping places. I'll work on that later, and I'll let you know how they swap out. But Illinois and Indiana have a good chance of staying on the grid, whether they're in the 15 or not, because my point about the Big Ten schedule and poking fun at them is, while they're all happy and proud of their 9-game schedule, their 9-game schedule leaves teams that don't really have very many games that matter in this discussion. So, let's take a look. So for instance, Ohio State. Ohio State played Texas. To their credit, they went out of conference and played a game that's on the grid here, one of the 44 games. Kudos to them. Then they go, week. I'm going all the way down. They don't play another team that looks significant on their schedule that could really challenge them and tell us something about Ohio State as a playoff team. Now, we know they're talented enough. We think they're going to have the record. So we're basically, you could almost pencil them into the playoff. There's almost no way we could imagine them not being an at-large team. But what are we going to learn about them, and what other teams are going to give us that chance to learn? That's what the grid's about, the 44 games. Well, we got to go all the way out to, what is that? That's week 7 when Ohio State plays Illinois. To find a team that coming into this week, Ohio State was going to be playing somebody who was a top 25 team or a top 15 team or a team that was a contender, another playoff contender. Now, maybe Illinois has now already been bounced out of that spot as a contender. But even having taken the bad loss, and again, I'm not sure about this. I'll evaluate it later and let you know. But for the moment, for this week, they were on the schedule, and that's why we're talking about it. Coming into next week, maybe they won't be there. Maybe we'll look at it and say, look, a team that gets beaten by Indiana 66-10 isn't worth being, not only are they not a playoff contender, but maybe they're not a team that we're even going to worry about on Ohio State's schedule. We're just going to, and you could say every game, and college football has always been this way, right? Every game could be a factor in college football. You could lose to a 1-10 team, and it's happened, every so often. Look, Notre Dame last year lost to Northern Illinois, right? Okay. Now they bounced back, won out the rest of their schedule, and made it in the playoff, and made it all the way, beat us, made it all the way to the national championship game. So it can happen. So, but that game easily could have been determinative. It could have kept them out. It easily could have kept them out of the playoff. And that goes back to that relative thing. The good news for them is a 12-team playoff, and enough of the other teams, if Alabama had lost 2 games instead of 3, if South Carolina had lost 2 games instead of 3, if Miami doesn't choke away a game at the end of the season, there's a bunch of teams that maybe had a better argument, than Notre Dame because of that loss. Or had Notre Dame lost the Northern Illinois game and one other game somewhere in there, it might have been a bigger deal in their schedule that might have cost them a chance to be in the playoffs. So any game against any team, no matter how bad they are, especially if you lose it or play badly enough to almost lose, could be a game that keeps you out of a playoff position, could be determinative. So I'm not... But again, we wouldn't have this grid and we wouldn't have anything to look at if we go down that logic. So we have to funnel it a little bit, right? We have to come up with a filter and say, what's the filter? So in this case, I'm telling you, I have applied a filter where I'm just saying, look, I've looked at these games and said, these are the games that either because they're ranked, they're contenders, or this is a team that could give them trouble, or we would expect is at least a tough game on the schedule. So therefore it might matter. So Illinois was that team on Ohio State's schedule. And frankly, we're just looking for a team that is that, because again, after the Texas game, we go, all the way out to week 7. From week 1 to week 7, there's not a significant game on Ohio State's schedule. Now we have to reevaluate. Is Illinois even a significant game? I don't know. For now, that's a team we're going to leave there. It looks like we could call them a significant team on the schedule. They still may, look, they won 10 games last year. They lost to Penn State, I think 21-7. So they weren't. It's not like they were horribly uncompetitive. So, and Ohio State has shown a propensity to play down sometimes to some teams that they shouldn't even be close to. So for now, we're going to think Illinois is going to stay there. Then the next week, you have to go out from week 7, 8, 9, 10, out to week 10. When Ohio State and Penn State play. Now, that's a biggie. Okay, that's obviously one of the games that before the season started, everybody's got that one circled on the calendar, say Ohio State, Penn State, especially this year with Penn State. A lot of people, including me, and I'm not saying I'm a believer in Penn State. I'm not saying Penn State's going to be the national title or in the national title game or win it. I'm just saying, and you've heard me say this several times already, Penn State is a team that looks like Michigan and Ohio State for the last couple of years, and not just because they're in the Big Ten, but they got a veteran quarterback, they got veteran other weapons, running backs, and not their tight end, but so they've got a veteran, their running backs, their quarterback, they got a veteran offensive line, they got a lot of career starts at offensive line, they had a pretty good defense last year, and they stole Ohio State's defensive coordinator. So they put a lot of money and effort into retaining players, keeping that core group of talented, good players, some of whom maybe could have gone pro, but came back to make a run at Penn State. And that's kind of the way the last 2 national championship teams have looked. And so Penn State has that look. Penn State, I think for most everybody, is on a prove it level, like people used to say about us before we did in fact prove it. So that's also something to remember about prove it. People said that for a while, right? We went for a 10 or 15 year run, especially when Mark Richt helped elevate the team, and before Kirby really got it all the way to the championship level, where even where we played. And look, it's even a revisionary, just to say for a moment, there's even a little bit of revisionary history in the 2018 national championship game following that 2017 season. There's a little bit of revisionary look at that goes with winning the 2021 and 2022 national championships, where people lauding the state of the Georgia program and the work that Kirby had done were pointing out, well, Georgia's been in the national championship game 3 of the last 4 years, 3 of the last 5 years, and won it twice. Okay, well, when we first got there and lost on that horrible, infamous 2nd and 26, and being that it's Alabama week coming up, I'm sure we're going to talk about that some more. But even, and I hate to even bring it up, I'm sure it's pain for you, for me, for all of us to even just say 2nd and 26. Let's have a moment of silence, right? Anyway, we know that the pain of that, but the point I'm getting at is that at the time was yet another moment where Georgia couldn't break through the glass ceiling, where Georgia didn't take the step, where Georgia was the team with all the promise but couldn't get it done. Well, Penn State's that team right now. But guess what? Every once in a while, the team that couldn't get it done gets it done. For many years, Clemson, people came up with the verb Clemsoning. Clemsoning meant that you were the team with all the talent, all the capability, and somehow you blew it and fumbled away the game that you shouldn't have, that you couldn't have afforded to lose, and failed to live up to the potential. Clemsoning. Now, we may be going back to a new form of Clemsoning, as they just got beat at home by Syracuse today, and they're 1-3. And, Dabo's getting angry at press conferences talking about how good his record overall is. And look, I like Dabo, so that's a conversation for another day. But point being is maybe there's a new Clemsoning coming up, that has to do with falling flat on expectations. And they were a team that I talked about, like Penn State, coming back with a veteran quarterback, supposed to have a veteran defense, a lot of key players. Clearly they're out of the playoff contention at this moment. They're out of national championship. They're not even, they're going to fight for just a decent season at this point. at 1-3. But so they lost at home to Syracuse, and let's just say for a moment, maybe that makes Tennessee look yet again a little bit better, right? This whole what do you call it, associative property that comes with football, where we said, well, Syracuse probably isn't as good a team as they were last year. Maybe it wasn't so great that Tennessee beat up Syracuse in a neutral site game in week 1. Now all of a sudden, Syracuse goes to Death Valley at Clemson and gets up a big lead and holds on and wins, beats Clemson at home, and it wasn't like on a fluky last second field goal or something. And again, I'm not ripping at Georgia Tech. Kudos to them for winning the game, but this wasn't even a close one, right? Syracuse led early, they led often, and they held on and they won by double digits. So Clemson's in trouble, and we don't know exactly what's happening there because they look like one of those veteran teams that could have something to say in the playoff. It's not happening. And a whole different thing. And maybe Syracuse actually looks a little better now than we even thought. So maybe we even look a little better by extension, or the associative property here, because we beat Tennessee and Tennessee beat Syracuse pretty handily. So, it's all going around in a big circle, and that's what we're forced to do in college football, because it's not a league where everybody plays everybody, or there's 134 teams, and most of these teams aren't going to even play each other. We're not even going to play everybody in our conference or even that close, and nobody is, even with a 9-game schedule. So, but we are looking at the games they did play. So Indiana and Illinois are in this grid. Illinois was in the contender slot because of there being a top 9 team. And they look like they probably don't deserve to stay there. But I think they still could be a team that maybe they're good enough that they can give Penn State or Ohio State or somebody some trouble if they're on that schedule. And they're not on Penn State's schedule, by the way. So Indiana, looking at Illinois' schedule, the 3 games that they had, as they were in contender slots, so we had all their games marked for their games that mattered. And those were going to be Indiana today. They lost. USC next week. So they got to turn around next week and play USC. Last I saw, USC was leading their game late. If they win, USC is definitely going to take a step up in standing, and everybody's been waiting for them to show that they could be a top 15 team, not just a fringe top 25 team. Maybe this is the year they're putting it together. We'll wait and see. Not too early to get too excited, but they're a team that matters because they have the talent and the coaching to beat a heavyweight team and affect the game. And then Illinois has the Ohio State game on the 11th or week 7 that we were just talking about. And then after that, Illinois didn't have any other games on their schedule that, were against any other contenders or teams that we thought were significant. So going back to Ohio State had Texas to start. They had Illinois coming up on the 11th of October in week 7. Then they have Penn State. Oh, sorry about that. They have Penn State coming up on week 10. That's November 1st, the same week we're playing Florida. And then Ohio State has Michigan at the end of the year. And again, Michigan is only on there right now. Michigan did beat Nebraska today. Michigan was at the bottom of the top, in the 20s and the top 25. They beat Nebraska on the road. So they will likely move up a little bit in the top 25 and remain a top 25 team. I'm unconvinced about how good they could be, but they probably have the potential to finish the season anywhere from the teens into the 20s. They could also finish unranked. I mean, they could go on a heater and somehow go higher than into the the high teens or into, better. But I don't think that. I think their most likely scenario for Michigan is that it's a building year with new talent. But nonetheless, because they lost to Oklahoma at Oklahoma, which there's no shame in that. But Oklahoma won that game pretty handily. And so right now we're just thinking Michigan is a good team and maybe a top 25 team, but they beat Nebraska on the road. But if they're a fringe top 25 team, why are they on Ohio State's schedule and in our grid? Well, because Michigan has won that game 4 years in a row. I mean, so again, for Ohio State, it's prove it when it comes to Michigan. Like, they haven't shown whether they're the national champions like last year, whether they're the best team in the Big Ten or not. They have not shown that they can beat Michigan. Good Michigan or mediocre Michigan. The mediocre Michigan last year, 8-5 team, couldn't beat them. Year before, Michigan was national champion, couldn't beat them. They could have been the national champion. Michigan beat Ohio State. They won the national championship. So that's how Michigan is on that grid, because, for Ohio State, that's a game they haven't shown they can win. So not a, and that's, so we'll see what happens there. So that's an example of what the grid looks like with a couple of these teams. What's our grid look like? You might want to know. Hey, since this is the Daily Dawg, a Georgia based podcast. Okay. Well, we had Tennessee last week. We know what happened there. So step one, we won that game. We didn't play a game this week. So, next week, you know what that is, and that's a grid game. That's Alabama. Right now, Alabama is not on my list of, yes, they are. I'm sorry. They are in the top 15. They're in the 15 contenders. They're just barely in there. They got back in. They looked terrible against Florida State, not because the score was so bad, but we all saw that they got whipped in the game. Since then, they've won a couple patsy games, and they beat Wisconsin badly. But Wisconsin just lost. Wisconsin fans were cheering Fire Fickle today in their game. Luke Fickell, the coach who was at Cincinnati when Cincinnati came within a field goal or so of beating us in the bowl game a couple of years ago. That he left Cincinnati after that success and went to Wisconsin and has been really not good at all as the Wisconsin coach. They have gone backwards. They were a much better team before he got there. Fans are restless. They're calling for him to be fired. And they lost today 27-10 at home to somebody they shouldn't have lost to. And I'm sorry, but I forgot who it was. But so it was a smaller team and a team Wisconsin shouldn't have lost to, you would think. So the basic idea being that, look, what Alabama did to Wisconsin last week may not tell us much of anything. And that was a Wisconsin team, by the way, who had a decent quarterback who was injured and wasn't able to play in the game against Alabama. So we can't get too excited about Alabama. Somebody said it very apropos, and this is just leading in a little bit to the Alabama game, but somebody said it, and I think they had it right. We'll know more about Alabama when they play Georgia, when they play us this coming week, because what's Alabama going to do when they get punched in the mouth? When they got punched in the mouth against Florida State, they started bleeding. They fell to the ground and bled. Okay. The games that they played against the weaker teams this last couple weeks, they look great. They played with fire, passion, energy, like we've been asking our team play. They look like they've rallied behind their coach and their poor performance, and they look like a different team. But again, that level of competition doesn't tell us much. And what we can say is that level of competition was not able to punch them in the mouth. And so, we got punched in the mouth last week. That's one of the most impressive. We've talked about that. One of the most impressive things about our win against Tennessee is we went on the road. We got punched in the mouth a couple times and we wiped it off. We spit the blood out and we started punching back. So in the one chance Alabama had to do that, they laid on the ground. They said enough against Florida State. So, that may be the edge. That may be the difference in the game against, against them for us is, can we punch them in the mouth? We'll probably both get a few hits in. And are they going to respond like they did against Florida State and fall apart when things get tough? Or are they going to keep punching like we did against Tennessee? And are we going to keep punching? And if both teams keep punching, then it could be an epic game. But we're not ready to break that down, but that's just a little preview of where that's going. But so Alabama is in the 15 teams that we're watching. They certainly have the talent to be a contender, and they've righted the ship enough the last couple of weeks with enough energy and passion the way they're playing, even though they're beatdowns of teams that are overmatched, that I think we can give them credit and say they should be in the 15. So again, we're going through our list. What's on our grid? How many games are we in the grid of the 44 games? Well, Tennessee, Alabama next week. Then we don't have anything the next week, but then the week after that, Auburn. Right now, I'm including Auburn. Now, Auburn lost today. They were a bottom top 25 team. They may fall out of the top 25. They may work their way back in before we play them. There's a couple weeks to go. So we can look at Auburn's schedule and see what we expect and sort of predict where we think they're going to come into the game. I will say that Auburn hung pretty tough. They lost to Oklahoma, but they were in the game to the end. They were tied at the half. Oklahoma looks like a really good team at the moment. And so, the fact that Auburn lost today is nothing to sleep on. So, and we're playing at Auburn, not at home this time. So Auburn was on the road. So, we'll just have to see. Then the next week after that, we have Ole Miss at home. We know what happened against Ole Miss last year. So I don't think, they may or may not be as good as last year's team. We still don't really know about Ole Miss either. They're not as good defensively. They may be better offensively, if that's possible. Or they may just be able to beat teams differently this year and more traditional Lane Kiffin style, which is just to outgun you. Last year, they actually had a really high-level defense. And again, in the matchup thing we discussed a few minutes ago, that proved to be really difficult for us. We struggled against a higher-level defense, and we were not able to perform against a defense full of NFL guys in that game. Some of that was a lot of different things that I don't think were just matchups, and it had to do with our timing and schedule, everything else. We'll break that down as we get to the Ole Miss game too. But I'm not trying to make excuses, but I don't think it's just that Ole Miss, lined up and beat us man to man. They did, but I don't think that that's necessarily what you would say. Oh, well, that's because their defense was clearly better than our offense and would win, 9 out of 10 matchups. No, they won that day, and it was probably in 10 matchups against our offense and their defense from last year. It's probably we win 5 and they win 5. They were that good on defense, but they're clearly not that good on defense this year. They've given up a lot of points and yards, but they're also still, putting up a lot of points and yards too. So it's going to be a tough game. And because of the way we got beat last year, it's on the list. Then we go 4 weeks without another game. So that's on that list. And part of that is because at the moment, starting the season, I had the Florida game on the list on November 1st. It's not there anymore. Okay. Florida has not played well enough, and Florida lost today to Miami. Carson Beck and Miami beat Florida 26-7. And what you can say about Florida is Florida has played tough and with intensity on defense, and they've kept all the games close. They lost last week to LSU 20-10. And what's amazing about that is they threw 5 interceptions, including a pick 6, and still only lost by 10. So they are playing. They have talent, and they are playing with defensive intensity, but their offense is terrible. They threw 5 interceptions last week, and this week they had only gained 32 yards in the first half against Miami and 1 first down. I saw some of that at the half. And for the whole game, I think they were at 141 yards and just the 1 touchdown. So Florida's offense is terrible right now. They haven't given up, though. They're playing with heart to some degree, okay, because they kept the game. It could have been a blowout. And this was a 13-7 game in the third quarter, midway through the third quarter. So Miami was in the lead. They were 13-0 at the half, 13-7 in the third quarter. They held that for a while, and then it was eventually 19-7. And then eventually it was 26-7, somewhere in there. They went for a 2-pointer and didn't get it. So that's why the funny score. But Miami pulled away, and kind of controlled the game, I think you would say, all the way through. Beck was not particularly good. I think I saw his stats like something like 17 of 31 for 100 and something yards and 1 touchdown. So everybody's been lauding how great Beck's looked at Miami and how much better a fit it is for him than what he had at Georgia last year. We'll talk about that somewhere else. You've heard me say that, look, I'm rooting for Beck, and I think Bulldog fans should root for Beck. I don't think it's, I don't think he left in anger, and I think there was a mutual parting of company, and I think that we should respect that he played hard for us. He got injured playing for us, and he led us to some great things. He extended that 29-game win streak through his first season starting, got us into an SEC championship game undefeated and in a position to win a national championship at the end of that season, and he was the quarterback for that, and I think we should keep that in mind. So I'm not into booing Beck. I understand that some people maybe don't want to cheer him, and that's fine. But I do think I want to at some point come back and hit that idea about, because I just heard a lot of chatter in the last week from national media talking about, well, Beck in so much better position, and clearly a better fit now that he's at Miami and he's just home and this is great, compared to where he was at Georgia. And I'm looking at that. And yes, he famously had, 3 or 4 interceptions or whatever it was against Alabama. He went through a stretch where he had like 8 interceptions in a 3-game span last year, right, starting about this time of year. But to start the season last year, his numbers And the quality of competition we started the season with last year, very similar to what Miami had done coming into today this year. And his stats were basically very similar. So I don't understand the idea that, oh, Carson Beck is so much comfortable and obviously at home now, versus what he had before. I'm like, I don't see that. I don't see the comparison there. But nonetheless, Florida's not on that grid right now. Florida is not one of the games that I think we look at and say that's going to help determine we should win based on where Florida is right now, even as great as they're playing on defense and as difficult as they're making it on teams, but still losing. They are 1-3. They lost to South Florida. They lost to LSU, and now they lost to Miami. And none of those teams, LSU and Miami, might be as good as us. They might be tougher matchups one way or the other. Again, when you talk about those matchups, but they have flaws. We have flaws. They're both elite talent teams. I think they're at least are equal or we're better than them. So they have generally won the game against Florida pretty handily. So right now, the Florida game is not one that should be on our radar of being determinative. We should win that game. We should be favored by 2 scores or more when we get there. We should win that game, and it doesn't mean we will. Like I said, it could accidentally become determinative about the playoff, but hopefully not. So then that takes us to the Texas game on November 15th, which is week 12 of the season. So we play Texas. That's obviously a marquee matchup and something to really get fired up about. And then we have Chattanooga or Charlotte or somebody the week in between that. And then you have the Georgia Tech game. And Georgia Tech is 4-0. Georgia Tech today won its first game since 2015 when playing as an AP top 25 team. So 3 times since 2015, they gotten into the top 25 with an impressive win and a good overall record, only to immediately lose the next game and be bounced right back out. So Georgia Tech has taken another step forward in their progress of restoration by getting up to number 18 in the polls, being 3-0 coming into the day today, and winning their game comfortably at home as the number 18 team in the country, so they won't lose any ground. They generally beat down Temple, and nobody's going to, give you a big medal for beating Temple. But they jumped out a little bit like Tennessee did against us, 200 yards of offense and a bunch of points in the first quarter. Then they went through a huge lull in the second quarter, and they let Temple put some points and yards up. And then they kind of put it away after that and ended up being a 45-24, 21-point win. One could argue they should have beat Temple. I don't think they were favored by any more than that. So I think it's a solid win. Good kudos to Georgia Tech. And they are moving in the direction I talked about last time or time before of saying, I want Georgia Tech to be a top 10 team when we play them. It's more satisfying for your rival. It'll be a bigger deal when that game hits Mercedes-Benz Stadium if you're looking at 2 teams that are elite and it's a matchup of national significance, not just state significance. And I want to see it that way. And, we have typically held up our end of that bargain the last 10, 15 years. Georgia Tech has not. And they're in a position to do it this year. We're going to break down Tech's schedule and look at it, but let me just preview that by saying they don't have a game against another ranked team on their schedule until they get to us. And almost everybody who's brought them up, like if you watch Game Day Today or you've heard some other people, most people have pointed out, Georgia Tech will likely be or should be favored in every remaining game on its schedule until the Georgia game. So I'm not saying that means they're going undefeated until we get to the Georgia game. Georgia Tech also has been a team, and so that's one of the reasons we can applaud them for what they did today. They have been a team more often than not, as Reese Davis likes to say, steps on the rake. The old cartoon thing where you step on the rake, whack, smacks you in the face. Georgia Tech has been that team. Again, last 3 times they made it into the top 25, they immediately lost the next game. And those games weren't all against us or Clemson or some Florida State or some high-quality typical team, right? Some of those games were games against teams they should have won, like a Wake Forest or something like that. So they avoided that today. They won the game. So that's great. So, all right. In the end, we only had 2 games that we were looking at that we think these are going to tell us about teams that we think are going to be part of the playoff conversation. And that was Oklahoma is one of those teams that's in a playoff position, and they solidified that with, at least for today, they survived and advanced and stayed in the discussion, maybe strengthened their case. as a playoff team, and as a SEC contender by beating Auburn at home today. Auburn, we'll wait and see. They don't fall out of everything, but they were not in the contender list anyway. Indiana, Illinois seems to me like an elimination game between two teams that probably are taking up slots that they don't really need, especially Illinois at number 9. So they'll definitely be bounced out of there. Indiana came in ranked number 19th, so who knows how high they'll jump after a huge beatdown of Illinois. But they're interchangeable, and they both represent teams that will give us limited opportunities. We were looking at Ohio State and saying, look, Ohio State, I've got 3 conference games that matter for their schedule: Illinois, Penn State, and Michigan. Illinois maybe doesn't matter anymore, and Michigan is only on there not because I think they're going to be a contender. It's a heavyweight contender battle, but just because, like I said, Ohio State hasn't beaten Michigan, so you got to put that game on there. You look at Penn State. Penn State has Oregon this coming week, same week while we're playing Alabama. Penn State and Oregon are in clash. That's a biggie, okay? And then Penn State has Ohio State in November 1st, same weekend we're playing Florida. And then the only other game on Penn State's schedule that you might circle and say matters out of their 9-game conference schedule is their game against Indiana. So maybe that looks even more important now because of what Indiana did today against Illinois. But still not ready to elevate. Even if Illinois had won the game today, I wasn't ready to say, well, they're definitely one of the 15, 10 or 12 or 15 contenders for those 12 playoff spots. I've said this before too, but let me also qualify real quick. When I'm talking about contenders, I'm just saying these are teams that I think should be in the mix or can be in the mix or we're going to consider in the mix for the 12 playoff spots. I have given no consideration to the actual layout. Like, okay, you got to have a conference champion from each of these teams. You got to have the group of 5 team. You got to blah, blah, blah. I haven't figured that out, and we'll do that as we get later in the year. This early in the year, it's almost silly to chase it down. Yes, we can look at which team from the group of 5 is the contender, the leader in the clubhouse, but it's just too early. It's too early to know which of those teams. So I'm just saying, look, these are the top. These are teams that are either in the top 15 or I think should be among the 15 teams that I'm going to consider for those 12 playoff spots, especially if without conference affiliations and without rules about who gets in and who doesn't, I was just picking and saying, these are the teams that I think should make the playoff or are worthy. So, again, those 15 teams right now, Alabama, Florida State, Georgia, Illinois, before today, I think we're going to take them out. Iowa State, LSU, Miami, Ohio State, Oklahoma, Ole Miss, Oregon, Penn State, Tennessee, Texas, and Texas A&M. And as you could probably tell, that was in alphabetical order, not in ranked order. I don't even know that it matters to rank them at this point. It's just a matter of saying that's where they are. So that's kind of a rundown of what happened out there today. I guess real quick, let's just talk about the SEC before we jump out. There was a lot of SEC games today, and so the SEC with each passing week is shaping up a little bit more where we can look at and see where everybody is. So right now, here's where you got your, after today, your undefeated teams in the SEC are Ole Miss, LSU, Missouri, Oklahoma, Vanderbilt, who beat Georgia State 70 to something, 22, 24, 70 points for Vanderbilt today, 4-0 for Vanderbilt. So Vanderbilt's 4-0, Georgia undefeated 3-0, Mississippi State is 4-0. They are also incredibly improved compared to where they were, by the way. Mississippi State 4-0. Haven't really played anybody. They did play that Arizona State game. Don't know what that means. Arizona State was a playoff team last year. They didn't embarrass themselves. They represented themselves well, and they look like they deserve to be there when you look at the idea of if you think 12 teams deserve to be there. But they, among a 12-team playoff, in my way of thinking of what was playoff worthy in the old days, no. In a 12-team playoff, sure, Arizona State was reasonable to be there. And they acquitted themselves okay by being there. And Mississippi State went and beat Arizona State early in the season. So they're 4-0 with a decent out-of-conference win. Texas A&M, 3-0. So those are your undefeated teams in the SEC. Then you got Texas, Alabama, Auburn, Tennessee, Kentucky, all with 1 loss. Okay, and Kentucky's obviously not a serious contender out of that group. And then you got Arkansas is 2-2, and Arkansas lost to Memphis today. Not good. Okay. So poor Sam Pittman. I mean, he gets a little momentum. He looked good against Ole Miss, but they lost. Then they turn around and they lose to Memphis. Memphis is 4-0. I don't know what that means, but you shouldn't be losing to Memphis. They were playing Memphis on the road. Why are you doing that either? I don't know who scheduled that and why did they do that. And then Florida, like we said, is 1-3. And South Carolina lost the battle of who's the real Columbia. To start the season, we had who's the real Death Valley, right? LSU or Clemson. And LSU went to Clemson and won that game. They get the Death Valley bragging rights. Well, not every year, but a lot of years, we get the battle of the real Missouri, right? Columbia, Missouri versus Columbia, South Carolina. Columbia, Missouri versus Columbia, South Carolina. So Missouri's in Columbia and South Carolina's in Columbia. And anyway, South Carolina led that game late, but Missouri got a late touchdown and won it. So Missouri, as we said, is 4-0, and they're in the undefeated. South Carolina is now 2-2 after, again, getting their way up all the way up to number 11. I called them a paper tiger again, too. I think they're actually a legitimately good team, but that's another one of those where they just kind of got placeholdered because early in the season there's slots to fill and the teams are undefeated, so somebody filled in and said, well, South Carolina's up to 11. I don't think their talent level ever was befitting of maybe being the 11th team in the country. Vandy just beat them badly. They played well. They bounced back from losing to Vandy at home 31-7. They bounced back and played well. Lenora Sellers played. There was some question about whether or not he'd be able to play concussion protocol. He played, and it looked like they played a good game, but Missouri won. So Missouri, Drinkwitz, coach there, keeps finding ways to win, and he's I don't know if he's a contender for the SEC this year or not. We'll have to look a little bit more into that, but that's where we are right now. It's too early to really separate it too much, but Ole Miss, LSU, Missouri, Oklahoma, Vanderbilt, Georgia, Mississippi State, and Texas A&M are your undefeateds. And your once defeateds and probably still have a reasonable shot, Texas, Alabama, Auburn, Tennessee. That's your next group. And, right now we're probably just writing off Kentucky, Arkansas, Florida, and South Carolina as far as SEC contenders go. So we haven't eliminated a lot. We have a lot wide open. We talked about there what games happened in the SEC and what does it mean for us. We'll go over our schedule some more in detail coming up, and we'll look at each game and sort of break it down and say, here's what's left, especially as we're looking at this Alabama game. We say, what's it going to matter? One of the context things we're going to look at is our schedule. Can we lose this game and still make the playoffs? If we do lose this game, what does that say about the other games? What's the state of the SEC game? I think just as we jump into Alabama and we look at it, I think we all can agree. I'm sure Tennessee, having slayed the Alabama Giant and won 2 of the last 3 against Alabama, I'm sure Tennessee would tell you coming into this year, the game that was most important to win was the Georgia game. It's a little bit humiliating to lose 8 in a row. It's even more humiliating to lose 9 in a row. I talked about that from our perspective, having once lost 9 in a row to Tennessee. So, we're not in a good place with Alabama, right? We are in a little bit of a, I don't want to say completely humiliating because there has been some good things, but the overall series, Alabama is one of the few teams that Georgia has played more than 1 or 2 times and has a losing record against. LSU is one of those within the conference, and Alabama is the other. But this one is really out of whack. We have 26 wins to Alabama's 44 wins and 4 ties in the history of the series. A lot of people don't realize before the recent years that Alabama-Georgia used to be a rival and was an every year game and even had a neutral site playing back in the day. So we'll get into a little bit of that history like we've done with some other history as we get going. But, while we don't have a 8-game or 9-game losing streak to Alabama, we have lost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of the last 11. No, 9 of the last 10. I'm sorry. We've lost 9 of the last 10. So that's bad. And most of those have cost us high glory or ultimate glory, SEC championships or national championships. So this series matters a lot. Not one a lot of Bulldog fans grew up thinking of as a biggest rival. I guess that depends on how old you are because they were a big rival. But in most people my age or anywhere near it or younger's lifetime, until this recent years where we've been running into them in the SEC championship or national championship with the national championship on the line, I don't think it had been that much of a rival. And until we couldn't win these games, I don't know that it matters much. I think if we'd been splitting these games, we'd still think of, hey, they're a great team. We win, they win. We do have the advantage of the one win was massive, right? I mean, if you're only going to win 1 out of 10 games, then you damn sure ought to make it sure that you win a national championship, and you do it emphatically, right? So, and that kind of busts through that ceiling. Like we're talking about glass ceilings that teams have. That was a game that kind of just blows through the ceiling, because when you win a game and you win by more than just a last second field goal, or you win by double digits, and we can talk about it. That was close. I mean, the Keely Ringo interception return for a touchdown that he probably should have just taken a knee, or at least Kirby wanted him to at that time. That we were only up by 8 before that. So double digit win. Well, okay. We're going to talk about all these games as we get through this week, because this is going to be a big deal this week, right? But I will say that absolutely, if you're going to win one game, have it be when everybody's watching for the national championship. I mean, that is slaying the dragon, right? And even though we've lost the next 2 after that, and 9 of 10, everybody remembers the one. And so you don't hear a lot of discussion. I mean, that might have even caught you by surprise. I mean, you might have known we've lost more than we've won against Alabama, but maybe it caught you by surprise that it's actually 9 out of 10, dating back to the 2008 season. Let me just make sure that's right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, 9 of 10. We've lost 9 of 10. So, so I think this is the game that I definitely have circled. I'm not saying I would sacrifice the whole season. I don't think we're quite at I don't care if we win any other games this year as long as we beat Alabama. But there is a certain sense that there may be some empty calories feel to making the playoff yet again if we can't beat Alabama. Now, if we make the playoff and win the national championship and have lost this game to Alabama, I don't think I'll go back and say, well, I can't really enjoy this national championship, this third national championship in the last 6 years or 7 years or whatever it turns out to be, because we lost to Alabama. I don't think I'll say that. I will say there are some people, there are Ohio State fans that will tell you the national championship was great, but they can't believe that they have to listen to Michigan fans still tell them, yeah, well, you won the national championship game, but you didn't beat us. Hadn't beaten us in 4 years. I know that drives them nuts. And so, look, we don't have that kind of relationship with the Alabama fans. So that's the good thing, right? The Alabama fans are not really, again, Alabama and Georgia fans, despite what's happened in the last few years, despite these being the 2 preeminent teams of the SEC over the last 10, 15 years and regularly fighting it out for conference supremacy, that's not really where these teams are. But there is some history there. And, hey, look, they busted our 29-game winning streak. And if we let them win this game, then they'll bust our 33-game home winning streak. So how many times do we want Alabama to bust our streaks, right? Well, let's not. So we'll get into that as we get going next week. Until Monday, let's just call it here and say, go Dogs.